On my 68th birthday, my daughter posted a photo of the whole family gathered around a chocolate cake smiling, clinking glasses, confetti on the floor. I wasn't in it. I wasn't even invited. I'm Lorraine Hayes. I'm 68, and that was the moment I knew they had already let me go. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. It was early evening when I saw the picture, September 5th. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I'd reheated 3 times. I was still in my housecoat, hair pinned loosely like I used to wear it when the kids were young and mornings meant pancakes and missing socks. I had baked an apple tart, my own birthday gift to myself, and set to places at the table out of habit more than hope. My son lives 45 minutes away, my daughter, just across town. Neither of them had called. The photo came from a neighbor's niece, of all people. She posted it on Facebook with a cheerful caption. I stared at the image longer than I needed to. At first, I thought maybe it was a late Labor Day thing, or a party for someone else. But the paper banner hanging loosely over the fireplace read Happy Birthday, Mom, in gold script. It was my cake, my handwriting. I used to decorate their cakes like that when they were small gold piping, handmade sugar flowers. I taught them how, and yet I wasn't in the room. My name was on the banner, but I wasn't on the guest list. There was no mistake, no surprise party twist, just a very clear, very quiet message. We celebrated you without you. I sat there with my lukewarm coffee. The house silent, but for the distant hum of the refrigerator, a birthday card from my neighbor. Claire sat unopened on the counter, a pink envelope, careful cursive. She remembered, they didn't, and in that moment, something small inside me fell still, not broken, just still, like a clock left unwound. That night, I slept in the guest room. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to feel like a visitor in my own life. Maybe I already was. The next morning, I packed a suitcase, no destination in mind, just clothes for a few days, my journal, my old Canon camera. The house was clean, bills were paid. No one would notice I was gone. I took a train north, up the coast, watched the salt-blurred windows pass small towns and bent pine trees, gulls gliding low like ghosts over grey water. I didn't tell anyone where I went. No one asked. The hotel I chose was quiet, one of those roadside inns with floral bedspreads and weak coffee, but a clean room and a view of the dunes. At night, I could hear the ocean. I walked barefoot through the wet sand at dawn, the hem of my jeans soaked and clinging. I took photos of driftwood, of tide lines, of my own hand pressed into the cold shore, proof I was here, that I existed. I stayed 5 days, ate alone, slept deeply, cried only once in the booth of a small diner with a slice of pie I couldn't finish. The waitress, maybe in her 20s, asked if I was okay. I told her it was just a beautiful pie. She smiled, refilled my coffee, and didn't press. When I came home, nothing had changed. No messages. Just 3 envelopes in the mailbox, one addressed to resident. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, shoes still on. I had been gone 5 days, and it was as though I had never left. Sometimes absence reveals more than presence ever could. I wasn't angry. Not then. I was something quieter than that. A kind of recognition settled in, like finally seeing the frame of a puzzle you've been trying to finish and realizing your piece doesn't fit. There's a strange ache in being unmissed. I didn't confront them. There was nothing to say. What could I ask that I didn't already know? They had a party. They had a cake. They had their laughter. And they didn't need me there. That truth, however small it might seem to someone else, was enough to reshape everything I thought was solid. Even now, I think about that photo, how they arranged the room, how my granddaughter wore the dress I bought her last Christmas, how my son held his daughter and looked happier than I had seen him in years, how my chair, the one I always sat in during birthdays, was taken by my daughter-in-law's sister. A chair is just a chair, but you notice when someone else is sitting in it. After the trip, I started writing again. I dusted off my old journals. I wrote about the silence. Not the kind you get in a room, but the kind that grows slowly between people thick like fog. The kind that starts with missed calls and turns into forgotten birthdays. The kind that lets you disappear while they keep living. I didn't tell anyone about the trip. It was mine. 5 days by the ocean, alone, healing something they didn't know they had cracked. I've never asked them why they left me out. Maybe they thought I wouldn't enjoy it. Maybe they thought I'd be tired. Maybe, and this is the hardest, maybe they didn't think of me at all. But I was always the one who remembered, the one who made things right, the one who stayed. And that year, they didn't even remember to call. Sometimes the absence of cruelty is mistaken for kindness, but forgetting someone can cut deeper than any words. And that's where I was, on my 68th birthday, sitting in a kitchen of fading wallpaper, a tart cooling on the counter, my name stretched across a banner in someone else's house. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was the moment I knew they had let me go, quietly, slowly, and completely. You don't really notice when the giving begins. It starts in such small, ordinary ways, like picking the corner piece of toast so your daughter can have the one with more butter, or choosing the cheaper shoes so your son can have the good science kit. At first, it doesn't feel like giving. It just feels like love. It feels like breathing. I was 23 when I gave birth to my daughter, Anna. I was 26 when my son, Miles, came along. We were living in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in West Haven, Connecticut. The floor creaked, the heat sputtered, but I painted those rooms with my whole heart. Ducklings on the nursery wall, a mobile I made by hand. We didn't have much, but I made it beautiful. I remember stitching curtains from old bedsheets, wrapping gifts in brown paper, because we couldn't afford wrapping paper some years. But the children never knew. They never saw the seams. Their father, Rick, was good at fixing cars, but not much else. He worked late and came home tired, often silent. I never asked for more than what he could give. I kept the house warm. I packed his lunches. When he lost his job the second time, I picked up night shifts cleaning medical offices. I wore rubber gloves that cracked my hands and smelled like ammonia for days, but the fridge stayed full. The rent got paid. One Christmas, I sold my grandmother's cameo brooch, the one she wore to church every Sunday, to buy Anna a violin. She had seen one at school and came home wide-eyed, saying she could feel the sound in her chest. That was all I needed to hear. She played it for 3 months before quitting. Said it hurt her fingers. I never mentioned the brooch. I just wrapped it in memory and moved on. You'd be surprised how much a woman can hold when no one's looking. Birthday parties, school plays, emergency room visits. I remember once, Anna had the flu the same week Rick's mother came to stay. He didn't lift a finger, and I was up every 2 hours changing sheets, boiling tea, reheating soup, keeping the peace. I even managed to sew the button back on his mother's coat before she left. She never said thank you. Neither did he, and still I showed up for everything. I went to every parent-teacher conference, even when I had to sit in my car and cry afterward because the teacher said Miles was falling behind. I stayed up with him on those nights, helping him rewrite his essays, sounding out words he should have known already. I cut his sandwiches into stars until he was 12. I stayed up waiting for them both through high school dances, college visits, first heartbreaks. When Rick walked out, when the silence finally cracked open, and he said he was done living like a ghost I didn't fight, I let him go. He had already left in every other way. I remember standing at the kitchen sink after he drove off, staring at the dishes piled high and thinking, so now it's just me. There was no dramatic crying, no throwing of plates, just a quiet turning. I dried my hands, picked up the calendar. and started planning meals for 3 instead of 4. Then, eventually, too, I worked 3 jobs to get Anna through college, administrative work during the day, cleaning offices at night, and bookkeeping on weekends for a retired dentist who paid cash. I'd get home after midnight and sleep for hours before starting again. I remember falling asleep on the bus one morning, missing my stop, and walking an extra mile just to make it on time. I never told them that. Why would I? When Miles wanted to go to art school, I took out a second mortgage. I still remember the way he lit up when he got his acceptance letter. How he hugged me like he hadn't since he was a boy. That hug was worth every penny. Or so I thought then. I was the one who drove them to the DMV, to their college move-ins, to job interviews. I sat in the waiting room while Anna gave birth to her first child. And again when she went in for gallbladder surgery. I held her hand before the anesthesia kicked in and was the one who picked up her prescriptions afterward. When Miles lost his job 2 winters ago, I sent him grocery money without him asking. Just a note tucked into a card. Hang in there, love. Mom and I kept all their secrets, the DUI, the near divorce, the failed class. I never judged, never told the rest of the family, never raised my voice. I was their safe place, their soft landing. Sometimes I think I didn't raise children, I raised comfort. I raised convenience. I raised a version of myself so quiet and dependable they forgot I had edges. There were birthdays I made magic with food stamps. I once turned a single rotisserie chicken into 3 meals. I learned to fix the washing machine myself because the service call cost too much. I found a way, always, even when it wore me down. Even when it meant I didn't buy a winter coat for myself 1 year so I could get Anna the dance costume she wanted. And I didn't keep score. Not then. I wasn't giving to earn. I was giving because that's what you do when you love someone. You give until you're empty, and then you keep giving, thinking that surely someone will notice and offer to fill your cup, but the cup stayed empty. I think back to the afternoons I spent crocheting baby blankets for each grandchild, colours matched to the nursery, personalised with their initials. They're probably in closets now, all given away. That's the way it goes. Still, I was there. For every first birthday, every recital, every holiday, even when I had the flu, even when the roads were icy. Even when I had to leave my car running in the driveway because the battery had started dying when the temperature dropped. They don't know I once skipped a doctor's appointment for chest pains because Anna needed me to watch the kids on short notice. I told myself it was probably nothing. It was, thankfully, just stress, just fatigue, just years of being the one who never rests. I was the family historian, the keeper of traditions. I wrote down the recipes, labelled the photo albums, saved the baby teeth, and remembered the stories behind each broken ornament. I carried the legacy so lightly they never noticed it was heavy. And now, when I think about that birthday, the one they celebrated without me, I wonder if they told the stories without me, too. Did they remember the year the cake fell and I served it anyway, laughing through the crumbs? Did they speak of how I used to tie ribbons around their forks, just to make it special? Or did they just eat and drink and smile for the camera, forgetting the hands that taught them how? Maybe this is the price of love that doesn't ask. Maybe this is what happens when you train people to believe your presence is permanent, your sacrifices invisible. They celebrated me without me, and the saddest part wasn't the cake or the absence, it was realizing they never saw the giving as something rare. To them, it was just what I did, just what I was, and I wonder now, when did I stop being someone and start being service? There is a difference. And the day they hung that banner without me in the room was the day I finally saw it. It didn't all fall apart at once. That's the thing about slow neglect, it wraps around you like ivy. Soft at first, almost beautiful, until one day you realize it's taken the light. I think the first time I truly felt it the distance, the slipping was on a Sunday afternoon 3 years ago. It was early spring, just warm enough to open the windows. I had made pot roast, the way Anna used to ask for on her birthdays. I even found the little pearl onions she liked, which meant to grocery stores and a ride with my neighbour Claire because my car was in the shop. I set the table, ironed the napkins, pulled out the good plates, the ones with the blue rims that Rick's mother left me. I lit a candle, just for atmosphere, though I'm sure they wouldn't have noticed. I even wore lipstick, which felt foreign and slightly absurd, and then I waited. I watched the clock shift from noon to 1, and still no one came. My phone sat beside me, blank, no calls, no texts. I refreshed it several times, just to be sure. Maybe they were running late, maybe there was traffic. I made excuses for them the way women of my generation were taught to, layering grace over disappointment like a shawl over bare shoulders. Finally, at 1:34, Anna sent a message. "Sorry, Mom, Miles has a headache and the kids are crabby. Rain check." I stared at the words for a long time. No apology about the meal, no mention of the effort, just a soft, casual dismissal like cancelling lunch with a co-worker. That pot roast lasted me 5 days. From then on, the quiet hurts began to stack like papers on an ignored desk. A birthday card signed in someone else's handwriting. A Mother's Day call that came after dinner, rushed, like an obligation. Anna forgetting my friend Miriam had died, asking about her 6 months later while stirring her tea as though nothing had happened. I didn't expect grand gestures, I never have, but I noticed how I had become the afterthought. When Miles got promoted, I found out through a co-worker of his who recognized me at the grocery store. "You must be so proud," she said. I smiled, nodded, then drove home with the milk forgotten in the basket of the cart. When I called to congratulate him, he said, "Oh, I meant to tell you." It just kind of happened fast, but he had time to post it online, time to celebrate with his friends. Just not time for me. Even my granddaughter, Leela, sweet as she is, began to slip away. At 12, she started answering me in one word. Texts when I visited, she barely looked up from her phone. I brought her the same lemon cookie she loved as a child, and she wrinkled her nose, said she didn't like lemon anymore, as if it was nothing. That's the thing about growing old in silence. You start to question your memory. Was she ever fond of them? Did I imagine that? Sometimes I felt like I was slowly being erased, not with malice, just forgetfulness, like a photo left in the sun too long. The visits grew shorter, the calls more infrequent. Anna started scheduling family events without asking if I was free. I'd hear about a barbecue 2 days before, always with a soft "don't worry if you can't make it." I wasn't being excluded exactly, just deprioritized, pushed to the edge of the frame. Even holidays changed. Christmas dinner moved to Anna's house, less driving for everyone, she said, which made sense, but slowly I stopped being asked to bring anything. Then I stopped being asked to stay late. The grandkids would run to their tablets the moment gifts were unwrapped. I'd sit there with a warm cider in hand, pretending not to notice how invisible I'd become. One Thanksgiving, I offered to bring my cranberry orange stuffing. It was a tradition, the one dish Miles always asked for. Anna paused, then said, "Oh, we're just going to keep it simple this year. Store-bought is fine." I didn't argue. I just hung up and stood in my kitchen, staring at the recipe card written in my own faded handwriting. I folded it back into the tin, placed it in the drawer, and closed it gently. Sometimes I wonder if they'd even notice if I disappeared. It's not cruelty, it's convenience. They have their lives full and fast and full of noise, soccer practice, work trips, school pickups, and I've made it too easy for them not to worry about me. I don't complain, I don't ask for help. I pretend I'm fine when I'm not. That's on me. But the truth is, being forgotten doesn't always look like being left. Sometimes it looks like being left out gently, until you're standing outside a window watching a world you once built move on without you. I kept a journal that year, just notes. Really things I noticed, moments I wanted to remember or forget. March 8th, Anna forgot to tell me Leela made the honor roll. May 17th, Miles didn't return my call about the chest freezer. June 1st, called Anna twice. No answer, no call back. There's a loneliness that doesn't announce itself loudly. It sits with you at breakfast. It follows you around the grocery store, where you still reach for the snacks the grandkids used to like, only to remember they haven't visited in weeks. It's in the way no one notices when you cut your hair, or when your knees ache, or when you buy a new sweater and wear it just to be seen. I remember the summer I painted the back porch. Took me for days slow, steady work in the heat. No one mentioned it. I sent photos to both kids. Not a single reply, not even a thumbs up. That porch had held birthday parties, Sunday brunches, late night talks under citronella candles. It meant something to me, but maybe only to me. I started talking to myself more after that, not out loud, not quite. Just inner commentary, little acknowledgements that turned out nice. Lorraine, you did good today. You're still here. I think the hardest part was the realization that I was more useful to them than loved. I was the emergency contact, the backup babysitter, the keeper of spare keys, but not the center, not even a part of the daily orbit. Just someone you call when something goes wrong, not when something goes right. They didn't mean to hurt me, I believe that, but they did. And hurt that's unintentional is still hurt. 100 quiet stings, paper cuts across the soul. I don't know exactly when I stopped reaching out as much. Maybe it was gradual. A missed call I didn't return, a birthday I didn't remind them of. An invitation I let expire, but the silence between us didn't feel empty, it felt deserved. Because sometimes the loudest truth is the one no one says out loud. You no longer matter in the way you once did, and the ache of that is sharp, but it's also illuminating. Because once you recognize it, once you name the quiet hurts you, can begin to ask the most important question, what do I want my life to be now? And that's where I found myself, one afternoon in November, folding laundry in a house that had grown to quiet, to clean, to untouched, wondering not why they had changed, but why I had waited so long to notice. The answer would come, slowly, like fog lifting from a field. But first, I would have to face the final hurt, the line they never should have crossed. I had always believed there was a kind of unspoken contract between mothers and their children, not made of law, but of love, a mutual understanding that you give what you can, and one day they will honor you not out of obligation, but out of memory. I carried that belief like a stone in my chest, heavy, but grounding. But stones wear away, and beliefs too, when chipped at long enough. It was around the time of tax season. I remember, because I was sorting through old receipts in the hallway closet, an entire box of them dating back to when Rick and I were still together, grocery store stubs, donation slips. A few old birthday cards that had slipped between file folders. I was trying to be responsible, trying to stay sharp, keep things in order, even if no one else noticed, especially then. I was looking for the paperwork from the home insurance renewal when I noticed something strange. A manila envelope tucked in the back, thicker than the others, not labeled in my handwriting. Inside were 3 neatly folded documents. At first glance, they looked like banking forms. The first was a notice from the mortgage company. The second was a withdrawal record. The third, and this is where my breath caught, was a form transferring co-ownership of my home. Not our home, mine. Signed by me, only I hadn't signed anything. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, some old document from years ago I'd forgotten, but the date was recent. And the signature, my name, misspelled, slightly curved. Across the page like a poor imitation. My stomach went cold. You know, that kind of cold that doesn't come from the weather. The kind that starts in your spine and spreads out like ink and water. I sat down on the floor of the hallway, receipts spilling around me, and read the documents again, carefully this time. Co-ownership had been granted to Anna, with full authority to make decisions regarding sale or refinancing. I scanned for a notary stamp. There was one, but it looked off. I don't know how to describe it. Not exactly fake, just off, like it had been cut and pasted. I didn't sleep that night, not out of panic, out of disbelief, out of the quiet unraveling of something I had thought was still intact trust. The next morning, I called the bank, then the county office. I asked questions. Pretended I was confused about paperwork. The woman on the line was kind to kind. The way people are when they suspect something is wrong but don't want to say it outright. She confirmed the transfer had been filed, said the signature matched what they had on file. I hung up, heart racing, and stared at the front door like someone might walk through it and explain everything. But no one came, no one called, and I knew then. Without anyone saying it, this was not a mistake, somewhere in the past year or two. Anna, my daughter, the girl I had nursed through scarlet fever, the woman I had stood beside through childbirth and job loss, had forged my signature. Had taken my home not with a crowbar or a threat, but with a pen, quietly, neatly. Without a word, I didn't confront her. I couldn't, not then. I needed to understand why before I could even find the voice to ask. For a week, I went about things as usual, grocery shopping, laundry, Sunday morning walks. All the while, I was watching her social media, reading between the lines. A few posts about getting finances in order, one about looking for schools in a new district, a comment from a friend, hope the move goes smoothly. The puzzle pieces began to settle. I remembered something Leela had said offhand last fall. During a rare moment of teenage candor, Mom says we might get a bigger place soon, like with a real yard. At the time, I'd smiled, encouraged her. Didn't think much of it. Now I saw it for what it was. My home, the one with the peach tree I planted in '89, the porch I painted last summer, the tiny dent in the hallway where Miles hit it with his tricycle was being lined up for sale. Or alone, or worse, and they hadn't told me, not even given me the dignity of refusal. That's what stung most, not the legal betrayal, not the paperwork, but the silence. The assumption that I wouldn't notice, or worse, that I wouldn't fight. I think a part of me broke that week, not in a dramatic way. No shouting, no crying on the kitchen floor. It was quieter than that, a kind of folding in, a stillness that settled over my chest like snow. I moved slower, ate less, slept with the hallway light on, as though it might ward off the unfamiliar chill I now felt in my own home. There's a particular pain in realizing that your children don't see you as a person anymore, that you've become a piece of property, a hurdle, a line item in someone else's budget plan. I had raised them to be practical, to prepare, to protect what mattered, but I hadn't raised them to value me beyond my usefulness, and now they were cashing in. I wanted to call Miles, to ask if he knew, to plead, maybe, for someone to explain it to me like I was still worthy of an answer. But something stopped me, not pride, not even fear, just the awful knowing that the truth would hurt more than the silence. So I said nothing, for now, but I began collecting. Not things, not evidence, not yet. I collected silence. I watched their patterns. I saved emails, letters, voicemails. I started making notes. I cleaned the house like someone who might have to leave it at any moment, not out of paranoia, out of respect for myself. For the years, I started asking questions, to quietly To neighbours, to Claire, to a man at the bank I trusted, who told me what forms to request if I ever wanted to get a clear look at your title. I smiled, thanked him, wrote it all down in a notebook I kept hidden in the linen closet. It was not revenge I was after, it was clarity. Because when someone crosses a line, that deeper line built on decades of trust, you don't respond with rage, you respond with remembering who you are, what you've done, what you're owed not in money, but in truth, they thought I wouldn't notice, that I was too old, too quiet, too tired. But they had forgotten one thing. I built this house, I paid the bills, I kept the records. I know where every crack in the plaster lives, where the wires run, where the memories sleep, and now I knew exactly where the line had been drawn, and what lay on the other side of it. I just had to decide what to do next, not loudly, not quickly, but deliberately, the way women like me have always done things, with silence, with strength and a plan. There's a kind of power in silence. But you only learn that after you've spent a lifetime trying to be heard. In the weeks after I discovered the forged documents, I didn't say a word, not to Anna, not to Miles. I answered calls when they came, which wasn't often. I smiled when prompted, nodded during updates about the kids, offered soft encouragement. When they spoke of work stress or errands or house repairs, I became a kind of mirror reflecting back what they wanted to see, never letting on what I knew. I wasn't pretending out of cowardice. I was preserving something, my own sense of gravity. When you've been made to feel small, there is something quietly defiant about withholding your voice until you choose to give it. I woke earlier in those days. Before the sun, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of weak tea and stare out the window as the neighbourhood woke. The hum of sprinklers, the dog down the street with the raspy bark. My mind was sharper then. In the cold hours, I'd think about the house, about the signatures, about the long road that had led me to this moment, the moment a woman realizes her life, once open like a garden gate, has been trespassed. I started keeping a ledger, not of their wrongs, of my truths. I listed everything I still owned outright, the furniture, the few stocks Rick left behind, the jewelry I'd tucked into the old sewing box that no one knew still held value. I made copies of documents, stored them in places only I would remember. I inventoried the safe deposit box. I checked the balances in accounts I hadn't touched in years. And then I called a lawyer, not someone flashy, just a quiet man I remembered from the library board meetings. Kind eyes, a steady voice. We met on a Tuesday afternoon in a sunlit office that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. I brought a tote bag full of papers and my notebook. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch when I told him what had happened. He listened, flipping pages carefully, occasionally raising an eyebrow but never interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once, then said, "You were right to come. That's all I needed to hear. We didn't file anything that day. He said we'd take it step by step. First, he'd do some digging quietly. He warned me it would take time, that these things often did. I told him I had plenty, and I meant it. After that, I became a watcher, a keeper of minutes, not paranoid, just awake. I noticed more, like how Anna had begun asking casual questions about my schedule. Are you planning on being home this weekend? Still planning to stay there through winter, all sweetly phrased, but I heard the undertone now. She was looking for movement, for weakness. She was assuming my quiet meant approval or ignorance. I let her assume. In the meantime, I stopped giving, not everything, and not out of spite, just selectively. I didn't offer to babysit when Miles called in a panic about a scheduling mix-up. I said I had plans. I didn't explain what they were. When Anna hinted she might need help covering Lila's music camp tuition, I smiled and said, "You'll figure it out. You always do," then changed the subject. I didn't stop being kind, but I stopped being endlessly available, and that's when the shift began, small at first, a tone in Anna's voice confused. Then vaguely irritated, a text from Miles that took longer to respond. I could feel the way they noticed the absence, but didn't yet understand it, like someone waking in a room and realizing a sound they'd long tuned out has suddenly stopped. Silence unsettles people when they've grown used to your noise, and my life, up until then, had been one long hum of caretaking, of filling in the blanks. Now I left the blanks empty. I started walking more, not just for exercise, but to remind myself of movement. I took longer routes through town, stopped at the library again, spoke to strangers. I bought a new raincoat, dark green, with a hood, and when I wore it, I felt like someone else entirely. Not younger, not newer, just returned. I went to the movies alone. I sat in the back row and let myself laugh out loud. I wandered through antique shops and bought a teacup with a crack in the handle, because something about it made me feel seen. I went to a church service on a whim, sat in the back pew, and cried quietly during the hymn. No one asked why. That, too, was a kind of healing, and slowly I began to feel the edges of myself again. You don't realize how much of your body disappears when you spend decades folding into the shape of others' needs, how many rooms you enter as a shadow, how long you can live like that without noticing you've gone quiet inside. But now, in my silence, I began to hear myself again. One afternoon, I sat in the backyard, cup of tea in hand, the wind lifting the corner of an old garden journal I'd started keeping. I watched the bees move from one dying marigold to the next, slow and determined, and I thought, this is what reclaiming looks like. Not loud, not vengeful, just deliberate. I had no interest in confrontation. I wasn't waiting for a breakdown or a dramatic apology. I didn't need them to understand what they'd done, not anymore. What I needed was space, breath, truth. I had gone silent not to punish them, but to protect myself, to stop the slow leak of dignity, to stitch the edges of myself back together with quiet thread. I still saw them, now and then, dinners every few weeks, hollow catch-ups. They didn't seem to notice I was different, or maybe they did, and didn't know how to ask. Maybe they were afraid of the answer. At one point, Anna mentioned something about simplifying things in the future, about consolidating properties, making decisions easier in case anything happened. I smiled softly, nodded, and said, "You're right, it's important to be prepared." Then I excused myself and left the table early, let them wonder. Because in silence, I had found something louder than any scream I could have given, agency, and I knew. Deep in the place where mothers keep their old selves hidden behind the casseroles and emergency contacts and birthday reminders that the next move belonged to me, not them, and when it came, it would not be in anger, it would not be in words. It would be in how I moved differently, because silence, when chosen, is not emptiness, it's direction. And I was finally walking toward mine. It began quietly. Like most things in my life, no fireworks, no big announcement, just a shift. I remember the exact moment I realized I could move differently. It wasn't after some grand realization or lawyer's letter. It was when I stood in the hallway one morning, holding a box of winter scarves. I had meant to organize the hall closet, but instead I just stood there, hand still, mind stiller. I looked at the scarves, then at the coats I no longer wore, and thought, none of this feels like mine anymore. The house had become something I preserved, not lived in, like an old photograph you're too afraid to move, even though the frame no longer fits your walls. I placed the box down and walked into the kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of tea, sat in the exact chair I had used for decades, its legs slightly uneven, its cushion faded to a washed-out floral. I looked out the window at the backyard, the garden bed I hadn't touched that spring, the peach tree bending with age. And that's when I knew I didn't need to stay. The house was filled with memories, yes, but they were ghosts now, echoes of birthday parties, laughter through screen doors. The smell of cinnamon in October, lovely, yes, but echoes can't hold you. They can't protect you from betrayal, and they can't promise you peace. I called the lawyer first, told him I was ready. We met again. This time with a new folder between us filled with plans, revisions, next steps. I learned more in those 2 hours than I had in years about deeds, trusts, and the legal armor I should have worn long ago. Then I called the realtor. A quiet woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no small talk. I told her I wanted discretion, speed and honesty. She nodded, scribbled notes, and never once asked me why. It all moved faster than I expected. The house was appraised, photographed, and listed privately. No sign on the lawn, no public announcement, just quiet listings, one-on-one showings. I didn't want the neighbors to ask questions. I wasn't ready for their concern. In the meantime, I sorted, gave away things I had once thought I'd cling to forever. I donated Rick's old records. Finally, gave Anna's dollhouse to a local shelter. Burned a few old letters in the fire pit one soft, grey evening, watching the words turn to ash and float up like little farewells. Some nights, I walked from room to room in my slippers, fingers grazing the walls like I was saying goodbye. I never cried, not once, not because I wasn't sad, but because I wasn't mourning. I was clearing space, inside and out, and then, one morning in mid-May, I signed the final papers. I sold the house. The money went into a trust, a new one with my name alone. My lawyer helped me set it up airtight, clear, final. No one could touch it without my approval. No one could move anything without my say. It was the first time in years I felt something close to safety. I didn't tell the kids right away. They had stopped asking much by then anyway. Anna had gone quiet for reasons I can guess. My new stillness unnerved her. Miles texted sometimes. Small things, a photo of the kids, a meme he thought was funny. But the silence between us was now mutual, shaped like a polite canyon. I didn't owe them a warning, not after everything. But I did write a note, just a short one. No bitterness, just the facts. I've sold the house. I'm moving out of state for a while. Please don't worry, I'm okay. I left it on the kitchen counter, tucked under a jar of peach jam I'd made last summer. They wouldn't find it right away. By the time they did, I'd be gone. I moved to a small town 3 hours north, just outside of Brattleboro. A place with hills and wildflowers and air that smelled like water and earth. The house I chose was modest. 2 bedrooms, 1 floor, a wide front porch, and a narrow stream running just behind the fence. It was mine, entirely mine. I kept the furniture simple. No inherited pieces, no shared history, just what I needed. And what made me feel calm, I painted the walls myself, soft sage in the kitchen, pale linen in the bedroom. I hung up a small print above the fireplace that read, "Begin again." The neighbors were kind, but not nosy. A retired librarian lived across the street. She lent me books and didn't ask about my past. I went to the farmer's market every Saturday, bought lavender bundles, learned to cook with fennel, planted new herbs in clay pots lined along the windowsill. My days became quieter, richer. I signed up for a memoir writing group at the library, joined a walking club for women over 60. On Thursdays, I met a woman named Elise for tea at the local cafe. She was funny, sharp, had 2 sons who barely called. And she didn't apologize for enjoying her own company. I told her little bye. Little, not everything. Just enough. One afternoon, we sat by the riverbank and she asked if I ever missed it, the life I'd left. I remember turning toward the water and saying, I miss what I thought it was, not what it actually became. That was the truth. In moving differently, I wasn't just reclaiming space, I was reclaiming perspective. I stopped seeing myself as someone abandoned. I started seeing myself as someone who left on purpose. Because there's a difference between being left behind and walking away. And when you've been invisible for long enough, taking up space again, real, physical, emotional space feels like rebellion. Some nights, I still think of the old house, wonder who lives there now. If they notice the creak in the hallway, if they prune the peach tree, but I never wish to go back. That life so full of giving, of silence, of unacknowledged labour is over, and I don't long for it. I've started journaling again, real writing. Not just lists and reminders, stories, my stories. I write about the time Miles fell asleep on my chest in the laundry room, about Anna's freckled cheeks after summer camp, about Rick once playing music in the garage just to make me laugh. But I also write the truth, about the forgetting, about the forging, about the slow disintegration of memory and meaning. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I know who I was, I know what I gave. And I know, finally, what I deserve. They haven't come to visit, not yet. I think they don't know how. Or maybe they don't think I want them to. I'm not sure I do. Not now, not like this. I haven't closed the door, but I've changed the locks, and if they knock, they'll need to knock differently. With reverence, with recognition, because the woman they once called Mom has become someone else now, not a servant, not a storage space for their guilt, but a woman who moved, deliberately, quietly, and entirely on her own. People talk about grief like it always comes from death, but the kind I witnessed came from absence, quiet, subtle, and slow. The kind that settles in only after the source of comfort is no longer there. And you begin to feel your life stretch. Out cold in places where it used to be warm. I didn't leave with a bang, I left with stillness, and they didn't realize the weight I carried until it was no longer holding everything up. The first sign came to months after I moved. A text from Miles. Hey, just checking in. Haven't heard from you. Everything okay? I read it twice, noticed the period at the end. The absence of warmth, the kind of message someone sends when they aren't sure if they're supposed to care or if it's already too late. I waited a full day before I replied. I'm well, thank you. Hope the kids are good. That was all, and I meant it. But I also wanted him to feel the lack of depth. The shape of a reply without the cushion of old familiarity. He didn't respond. A week later, Anna called. It was just after breakfast. I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked up. Mom, she said. Her voice had that cautious lift to it. Like she was stepping into a room where something had once broken. I saw the letter. I meant to call sooner. I said nothing at first. Just let the silence stretch. Let her fill in the absence with whatever she imagined it might mean. I didn't know you were serious about moving. Serious, as though my leaving had been a gesture. A bluff, a soft cry for attention, not a choice, not a conclusion. I said simply, then added, I'm doing well. She asked about the house. I told her I was renting for now, that the garden was small but sweet. That I'd started writing again. She didn't ask what I was writing. She never had. There was a pause, and then she said, It's been different without you. I nodded, though she couldn't see. I knew what she meant. Holidays were coming, birthdays. The times when I had always filled in the blanks, sent the cards, baked the pies, organized the details no one wanted to think about until they were already done. The glue, and I was no longer there to hold the pieces together. She mentioned something about Thanksgiving, how Leela missed my cranberry stuffing, how the kids had argued over where to go because nothing felt right. I listened, I made soft noises of understanding, but I didn't offer, and she didn't ask me to come. It was the beginning of them realizing what I had always done, not loudly, but consistently. In the absence of my reminders, appointments were forgotten. In the absence of my steady check-ins, tensions lingered longer. Siblings who once passed through each other's lives via my coordinating texts and calls now stood further apart. I was the bridge, and the bridge had quietly pulled itself back to shore in December. I got a voicemail from Miles's wife, Tonya, a rushed, slightly frazzled tone. She asked if I had a copy of Miles's birth certificate because they needed it for a passport application and couldn't find the original. I didn't return the call. I knew exactly where it was in the cedar box beneath their old school papers, organized in labeled folders, the way I'd kept everything for decades. But that was no longer my role. That version of me, the human archive, the fixer, no longer lived here. It was strange, at first, to let go of the muscle memory. To stop anticipating needs before they were voiced, to stop doing without being asked, but with every unreturned question, every unresolved problem, I could feel them beginning to face the reality of what they had taken for granted, not maliciously, but thoroughly. I heard from Claire, my old neighbour, that Anna had tried to host Christmas that year. She said it was awkward, that the table felt too big, that the stuffing was underdone and no one remembered where the stockings had been stored. Claire didn't mean to gossip, she was just passing it along. Maybe hoping I'd take some comfort in the absence they were now tasting. I didn't gloat, but I did feel something settle in me, not satisfaction, but affirmation. They were learning. I got a Christmas card from Leela. Just a short note in looping teenage cursive. I miss your stories. I didn't realize how many you told until they stopped. Love you. I kept that card, taped it to the fridge, not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first true acknowledgement of absence. I had always worried that if I stopped giving, they'd stop caring, that my value was transactional, woven into my usefulness. But what I was beginning to understand was this: absence doesn't erase you, it reveals you. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I wasn't living with bitterness in my new, quiet life. I was simply allowing the void to speak for itself. By spring, I heard they'd begun seeing a family therapist. Claire mentioned it in passing, her voice low, like she wasn't sure if it was mine to know. Anna had apparently brought it up first. Said things felt disconnected, that no one was talking anymore, that something felt broken. I remember nodding, stirring my tea, and saying, well, that's a place to begin. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had held their emotional scaffolding together, encouraged forgiveness, smoothed edges, now without me. They were beginning to feel the sharpness of one another, and that was theirs to work through. I had taken myself out of the picture, and in doing so, they were finally seeing the frame, seeing the corners I had kept from splintering. Sometimes I'd walk down to the lake near my new home. There was a bench there I liked, weathered wood. Quiet. One day I saw a mother and daughter sitting a few feet away, sharing a sandwich, giggling over something small. I didn't feel jealousy. I felt gratitude that I had known that kind of closeness once, and gratitude that I had finally stepped away from its echo when it had turned hollow. I'm not sure what they think of me now, if they see me as cruel or lost or cold, but I suspect, deep down, they know what they lost. Not just the woman who baked the pies and found the lost paperwork and held the family calendar in her headly, her second brain, but the one who showed up fully, constantly, quietly, and now I was showing up for myself. I hadn't cut them off, I had stepped aside. And sometimes the space left in your absence is the most honest mirror a family will ever see. Let them look, let them learn. Let them decide what kind of reflection they want to face next, because I was no longer waiting in the wings. I had taken center stage in my own life. At last, there's a drawer in my new home I never opened until that spring. The top drawer of the pine writing desk by the window, the one with the narrow keyhole, even though it doesn't lock. I'd placed a few things in there during the move, a half-used notebook, an old pen set, a packet of stamps I hadn't touched. In years, I wasn't sure why I'd kept them. Habit, maybe, or the part of me that still believed in correspondence, even as the world stopped writing. One quiet Sunday, the rain tracing down the window in slow rivulets, I opened that drawer and pulled out a stack of note cards I hadn't seen since before I left the house. Thick paper, ivory with a soft gold edge. They used to be for thank you notes, little messages I'd tuck into birthday gifts or holiday tins, the kind of thing I thought made people feel remembered. I sat there for a long time, running my fingers across the top card. And then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I wrote a letter, not to Anna, not to Miles, not even to Rick. I wrote it to myself, to the woman I was before I was anyone else's anything. Before the title of mother swallowed my first name whole, before the years of giving turned into forgetting. Dear Lorraine, I wrote. It felt strange, formal, but I kept going. I wrote to the girl who once dreamed of becoming a park ranger, who loved maps and moss and the way trees seemed to listen without interrupting. I wrote to the young woman who moved into a small apartment with a man who promised steady love and forgot to keep it. I wrote to the mother who braided hair and scraped knees and carried the weight of 3 lives on her own shoulders. And I wrote to the woman who let herself disappear so gently that even she didn't notice at first. You tried, I told her. You gave them the kind of love that most people never learn how to give. You made homes out of bare walls, meals out of empty fridges, holidays out of exhaustion. You never did it for applause, but that doesn't mean you didn't deserve it. I paused there, staring at the sentence, and then I underlined it. That doesn't mean you didn't deserve it. It's a hard thing, writing to yourself with truth. It forces you to reckon with the ways you've betrayed your own needs, the way you kept showing up when you should have sat down, the way you hushed your voice so others could feel loud. I wrote for over an hour, 3 pages in total. Then I folded them, slipped them into one of the note cards, and sealed it. No name on the front, just a small, almost invisible line written along the top edge. Do not forget her again. I placed it back in the drawer, under the stamps. I haven't read it since. I don't need to. I remember what I said. That letter wasn't a goodbye. It was a restoration, a way of setting the record straight, not for anyone else, but for the one person who had always stayed, even when the world turned her invisible. A few days later, I found myself writing another. This one to Rick. He'd been gone nearly 15 years, and even when he was alive, we hadn't been close. He'd left quietly, emotionally first, physically later. No affairs, no yelling. Just a slow disappearance into himself. I used to think that was worse, but as I sat there, pen in hand, I didn't feel anger. I felt the weight of silence, the kind I had lived with for too long. So I wrote to him, too. I told him that I forgave him, for not knowing how to love me the way I needed, for leaving without saying what needed to be said, for not teaching the children how to cherish their mother. But I also told him that I forgave myself for staying too long, for thinking love meant endurance, for assuming silence was noble, and then I folded that letter, too, and burned it in a small bowl on the back porch. The smoke curled into the wind like a blessing, not for him, for me. There was one more letter after that, the one I never expected to write, to Anna. It came after I saw the picture. Another one, sent through a forwarded email by Claire, a school fundraiser event, families posing with awkward smiles and balloon arches. Anna was there with Leela. They looked tired, edges frayed in a way I recognized too well. I stared at that photo for a long time, something tender stirring just beneath my ribs. I didn't miss them. That wasn't it. I missed being the person they knew they could return to, the way I used to be their home. So I wrote, Dear Anna, I'm not writing to fix anything. I'm writing to tell you who I am now. So if you ever come looking, you'll know who to find. I wrote about the garden outside my window, the way the thyme grows wild and unruly. I wrote about the walking club, about Elise, about how I've started painting again small watercolor scenes of the lake and the way the light falls through birch trees. I told her I didn't expect her to respond. I didn't write to reopen a door. I wrote to show her that the door, once bolted by pain, was now simply closed, not locked, at the bottom. I signed it simply, Love Always, Lorraine, not Mom, not because I wasn't her mother, but because in that moment I needed to stand as my whole self, not just the part that served. I mailed it, no return address, just a stamp and a prayer. I don't know if she read it. I don't know if it mattered, but something in me shifted after I sent it. The air inside my chest felt lighter, like a room that had been aired out after years of dust. I no longer needed an apology. I no longer needed them to change. I had changed, and the letters, all of them, had given shape to that change. They were not pleas, they were testaments to who I was, to who I became, to who I refused to lose again. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the wind moves through the tall grass behind the fence, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea and imagine the letters traveling through hands, through time, through understanding that may one day arrive too late, and still, I'm glad I sent them, because even if no one ever writes me back, I finally wrote myself into existence. On my own terms, in my own words, and that, I think, was the beginning of peace. I wake early now, even without an alarm. The light here is soft in the mornings. It moves through the lace curtains like it's asking permission. I make my tea the same way every day, black with a splash of milk to teaspoons of honey. I sit at the small table near the window and watch the light crawl up the fence post, over the garden stones, and finally reach the leaves of the rose bush I planted back in March. There's something about routine that feels like prayer. The house is small, not cramped, not empty, just right. It holds only what I need, and most days I feel like I'm meeting myself again inside these quiet walls. I know where every drawer opens and where the sun lands at noon. I know the sound the back door makes when it swings closed. I know the smell of the pine trees after a rainstorm, and the way the birds settle on the fence line when the wind is low. There are days when I don't speak to anyone, not a soul. I used to fear that silence. I used to believe that a day without conversation was a kind of erasure, that being alone was a form of punishment, but it's not when it's chosen. Now I let the quiet hold me. It's a soft thing, not an empty one. I walk every afternoon, down the path near the old mill, across the wooden bridge where the river narrows. I carry a small notepad in my pocket, jot down what I notice: a fox near the bend in the trail, a child's red mitten caught in the reeds, an older couple walking hand in hand, saying nothing, just moving in rhythm. I write it all down, not for anyone else, but for me, to remind myself that life is still full not in noise, but in detail. I started a garden this spring, a small patch of vegetables behind the shed and a few rows of zinnias. I go out every morning and water them before the sun gets high. Sometimes I hum an old song my mother used to sing, a lullaby without words. The soil is rocky here, but the tomatoes are thriving, stubborn things, like me, I suppose. Claire writes me letters sometimes. She tells me the neighborhood has changed, that someone new moved into my old house, a young couple with a baby on the way. She said they painted the front door yellow and added a swing to the porch. I imagined it for a while. Pictured my old walls holding new laughter, new life. It didn't make me sad. It made me proud. That house deserved joy. It had earned it. Anna hasn't written back. Miles sent a message last month, just a short note. Hope you're doing well. Leela got into the music program. She's playing cello now. That was it. No questions, no warmth. But I smiled anyway. I remembered how she used to pretend the broom was a violin when she was little, how I clapped like she was on stage. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because not every thread needs to be picked up again. Some things unravel for a reason. I have no regrets about leaving. No ache in the decision, only in the years before it, the ones where I waited for them to see me again. But that ache has dulled now, it sits in the background. Like a scar that doesn't hurt when it rains anymore. I spend time now doing things that once felt selfish. I read novels all afternoon. I paint small watercolors of my hands, the garden, a pair I left to long on the windowsill. I cook meals that take hours, just for me. I light candles at night. I sleep with the window cracked, even when the air turns cool. I've come to understand something I wish I had known earlier, that being needed and being loved are not the same thing. One is about function, the other is about presence. I was needed for a long time, but I don't think I was truly seen. Now, in this small, unremarkable town, in a house no one visits, I am finally visible to myself, and that is enough. I still keep the letters in the drawer. I don't reread them often, but I know they're there, like stones in my pocket, weighted reminders. When I dust the desk, I sometimes press my fingers against the drawer's edge, feeling the grain of the wood, the quiet that lives inside. There's no ending to this story, not really, just this life, as it is now, slower, softer, filled with small rituals and deeper breaths. Sometimes I sit on the back steps and think about all the women like me, the ones who were told. Their value was in how quietly they served, who were given praise only for their absence of need, who cooked and cleaned and waited, always waited, for someone to say, "I see you," not just what you do. You, if you are one of those women, I hope you find a window of your own. I hope you find the kind of silence that doesn't erase you, but reveals you. I've stopped asking who I am without them. Now I ask, who was I all along? And the answer is quiet, but clear. I am a woman who walked away, not because I didn't love them, but because I finally loved myself. And in the soft hush of my new days, in the stillness of morning light through lace curtains, I have learned this. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. There's a mirror in my bedroom, now oval-shaped, rimmed in old brass, slightly tarnished near the base. I found it at a flea market just outside Brattleboro, leaning against a table of mismatched furniture and chipped china. It wasn't the mirror that drew me in at first, it was the way it reflected. The trees behind me, the way it held the world without trying to change it. I brought it home, wiped the glass clean, and hung it beside the window where the late sun catches just the edge of it in the afternoon. It's not a flattering mirror. It doesn't slim or stretch. It doesn't filter. It just shows things as they are. Most mornings, I stand in front of it before I dress, not out of vanity, out of quiet recognition. I look at the woman staring back, the lines near her eyes, the softness around her shoulders, the way her hair has thinned at the temples. I see the years etched into the corners of her mouth. And I don't rush to smooth them. I see the wear, the strength, the evidence of a life built with no shortcuts. I say hello, softly, to myself, and some days I even smile. The woman in that mirror is not the same one who stood quietly in the background of every family photo, who poured every ounce of herself into others until she became a faint outline in her own life. She's not the woman who once asked permission to be tired, who excused herself before crying, who measured her worth by how well she carried everyone else's weight. That woman was real. I remember her. I honor her, but she is no longer here. Now there is someone else, someone slower, gentler, but no less strong, someone who no longer trades her peace for a seat at someone else's table, someone who has built a new home in her own reflection, not in hopes of being seen, but because she finally sees herself. People ask sometimes, in small ways, if I'm lonely. It's in the questions they don't quite finish. Do you get many visitors? Do you miss company? Have the kids come up? I don't lie, but I don't elaborate. I tell them the truth as it is now, that my days are full of small joys. that I meet with the walking club on Thursdays, that I've made friends with a local baker who always gives me the day-old loaf for free, that I sit near the water most evenings and let the quiet settle into my chest like a slow breath. Loneliness is not the same as solitude. I have known both, and I have chosen one over the other. I keep a jar on my kitchen counter, now see glass, little shards I collect on walks. Polished smooth by the river's edge, they catch the light. Like pieces of old sky, I think they remind me of myself broken once, but worn into something beautiful by time and movement and choosing not to sink. Some days I write letters I never send. To my younger self, to my mother, to Anna, to know. One, I fold them into the back of my journal, not to preserve them, but to release them. Words don't need witnesses to matter. One letter I keep in the front pocket of my coat, written in blue ink on plain paper. It says only this: you are not too late. I carry it like an anchor on days when the past tries to tug me back. There have been whispers of reconnection. Leela sent a photo last month, her standing on a stage, cello in hand, smiling that half-shy way I remember. There was no message, no caption, just the photo, a small extension. I printed it and taped it above my desk. Miles called once, just before New Year's, left a voicemail, said he was sorry. Though he didn't say for what, I didn't call back. Not because I didn't care, but because the call wasn't for me, not really. It was for himself, and that, I've learned, is a different kind of reaching. Anna hasn't written. I don't expect her to. Some reckonings take longer. Some people never open the letters that would save them, but I've stopped waiting at the mailbox now. I wait for the moonrise, for the shift in the wind, for the way my hands still know how to make soup from scratch and fold towels into neat squares. I wait for nothing but presence, my presence. Sometimes I catch myself humming again, not a song I remember, just a melody I've invented stitched together from the silence. The rhythm of my footsteps, the creak of the porch swing in the wind, I think I was always humming. I just couldn't hear it over the noise of everyone else's need. Now I walk through my days as if they are sacred, because they are. Every morning I wake, every night I settle beneath my worn quilt, I remind myself that this life, this quiet, honest, uncluttered life is mine, fully, finally, and in this gentle claiming. I've discovered a truth no one taught me. You don't need to be remembered to be real. You don't need to be needed to be whole. You don't need an audience to matter. You only need to see yourself clearly enough to stay, and I do. I see her, the woman in the mirror. I see her carrying groceries down a gravel path, laughing with Elise at the farmer's market, burning letters under a full moon, writing poems she may never share. I see her choosing herself again and again and again, and the world may not notice, but I do. That's enough. It's more than enough, because peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of self, and I am here, still, unfolded, unfinished, but finally and entirely my own.